As a teacher, I see how C++ is complicated for beginners. There are really so many things that you can do wrong very easily, and the compiler won't even mention this in the warnings. What if, instead of summing the sinusoids, we will generate a signal and the filter will cause changes in the amplitudes of particular sines? We'll be able to shape the sound, the timbre of the sound.
Tell me first a little bit about yourself, what you do like daily, and how did you get into audio?
Hi Wookash, thanks for having me. My name is Jan Wilczek and I'm a freelance audio developer and a teacher. So how I got into audio, it's a long story. I'll try to keep it brief. I was exposed to a lot of various music at a very young age. Basically, my father was listening to all sorts of music from, electronic music to symphonic classical music, film scores, Pink Floyd, Peter Gabriel, what have you. And also music was very prevalent in my family. So I picked up the piano at the age of 6, trying to follow the footsteps of my sister. And then when I was in high school, I additionally picked up an electric guitar. And also around that time, I was very interested in creating music, in making music. I also played in a band. And that's how I got a little bit into the real realm of audio mixing and mixing, as it's done in recording studios. And then I found out that at a nearby university, there is a degree in acoustic engineering. And I thought, well, maybe I could there learn, how this whole business of sound engineering works. And I believe they also marketed themselves that they have quite a few other possibilities. So the idea was that if this sound engineering route doesn't work out, I can always choose something else. So when I went there, I learned some sound engineering, although that was quite a bit late in the program. But above all, I was introduced to programming, digital signal processing, and sound synthesis. So I guess that your audience knows what programming is, but
Yes,
but it's maybe not so clear what is DSP and sound synthesis so much. So just to be brief, digital signal processing includes, obviously processing signals, but more specifically, it focuses on areas like sound, image, and video. So digital audio signal processing is a subfield of DSP. And that's basically the theory of how to process sound in general. We could think of it as algorithms, right? And data structures in computer science. Algorithms are purely theoretical until we implement them. And that's the same with DSP. It's also purely theoretical as long as we don't implement it. But it serves to be implemented. And as kind of a subfield of DSP, we could also look at sound synthesis. So this is the art of generating sound with means other than, let's say, acoustic instruments. And specifically, digital sound synthesis is the art or the science of generating sound with, computer code. And I was introduced to these concepts thanks to all the amazing researchers that I met, and one of them I'd like to underscore. This was Professor Marek Pluta, who was an incredible enthusiast of sound synthesis and musical DSP, we could say, and he was kind of my first mentor in this area to guide my self-study.
If you would like to support this channel, you can become a member on Patreon. You will be granted access to a private Discord channel where you can chat with other supporters and guests of this show. For more details, check out my website at wooka.sh. Wookash.
Also, at the time, I really started enjoying programming, the pure art of writing code. And I was looking, maybe I could somehow, combine the two, to have programming and audio together. And luckily enough, at my university, there was a spin-off company which was called Tecmo, which focused mainly on speech processing, which was speech synthesis and automatic speech recognition. But they also started working on a game audio spatialization engine. This is the idea of having some algorithms that try to generate realistic sound fields in games, so that when you are, let's say, in a first-person perspective, you feel immersed thanks to the audio that envelops you. Long story short, I did an internship at this company, then I became a junior developer, and with this, I saw how much knowledge I still lack. So I started a second degree in parallel of computer science at the same university. And so I had, I think, 2 years there where I learned all the computer science basics and finished my acoustic engineering, Bachelor of Engineering degree. And then I said, okay, I see that I have my skills in programming, I have my skills in acoustic engineering. Now I really want to focus on the area of signal processing. And I still have my master's degree to complete. Let's make it super focused on DSP. And where in the world can I study, signal processing in depth, like to be exposed to, the best professors, the best environment, and I don't need to learn any additional subjects that are, unrelated, which is often what happens in master degrees or in bachelor degrees. And I had another amazing mentor who was called Konrad Kowalczyk. He's also a professor now, and he had a lot of contacts. He knew a lot of this area in the world, and he could tell me where are the good research institutes, universities related to audio. And believe it or not, there aren't many. And I applied to some, and of these, of most interest was the one at the University of Erlangen-Nuremberg. It's called FAU. And this is a special university because it has a joint program, or rather it had at that time a joint program with the Fraunhofer Institute. And if it's not clear, the Fraunhofer Institute is a research institute in Germany that was responsible for developing MP3, which is one of the most groundbreaking events of the late 20th century when it comes to audio. So obviously from the MP3 patent, they got a lot of money, and so they invested heavily in building their facilities, which is called Audio Labs, and it's a joint institution between the university and Fraunhofer. So this program, which was called Advanced Signal Processing and something else, but the signal processing part was important. Communications engineering, that was Advanced Signal Processing and Communication Engineering. So I was not so much interested in communications, which is related to signal processing, but I was more interested on the signal processing side of things. And they had like a huge number of professors who were focused solely on audio. This was this really amazing and I think unique place in the world. I'm not sure if there is a second place that has as many professors related to audio. Maybe second to that is only the Aalto University that I'll get on later. So that was an amazing program. I got there. They take only a few students. Each student gets a mentor. Again, my mentor there was really? Professor Emanuel Habetz, which was again amazing person, and I still, he's quite famous in his field. He deals more with speech nowadays, but again, he had many contacts, and when I approached him and said, I really love this degree, but is there a possibility I could, do the last semester, which is writing just a master thesis, which should be a research project, somewhere else, somewhere abroad? And he said, sure, why don't we contact the Aalto University, Professor Vesa Välimäki there? And Professor Välimäki was kind enough to take me in, to trust me. And I went to Finland, to Helsinki, to write my master thesis. And this is very special because it wasn't part of any official exchange program. This was funded by the German government, but the funding was for students who study in Germany who want to go abroad. But it wasn't like an official exchange program. So it was kind, on both sides, that both sides took that risk. My master thesis was in virtual analog modeling of audio effects using neural networks with some physics support, or physics-informed neural networks. And then right after that, I got my first job at Loudly in Berlin, where I worked on a music-making app. And also, when I was doing my master's, I started WolfSound, which is my main platform now. It's my company. And that's another place where I learned a ton. Basically, WolfSound was also there to help me in my learning. So that's the story of how I got into audio. And my learning, still continues to this day, where I write audio software for clients. And I also create teaching materials, educational materials for people who, want to follow my footsteps, you could say. But also I create some of them for myself to become better and to learn more. That was a long answer to your short question.
Nice. It was really detailed, and this is fun to understand like all the steps of the journey. I would like to get back to the technical aspects for a bit and discuss more like digitally speaking. If you want to represent an audio, what you need to do to map the physical reality, like how does it work in terms of signal processing underneath, and then what you can build on top of that, like how does it work in terms of computers?
Sure. Let's take this podcast as an example. I think it's a good illustration of how digital audio works. So how is it possible that we can talk to each other over the internet? Well, if I say something, my vocal cords vibrate. And this sound on its own is kind of unpleasant. But then it gets shaped, one could say, filtered by the vocal tract. So the path from my vocal cords to my lips. And out comes, what travels here through my vocal tract, and what comes out is an acoustic wave. An acoustic wave is a propagation of vibration of particles, or more accurately, pressure changes, periodic pressure changes over time. This is a very cryptic word, but if you imagine, air particles flowing in the air, if I say something, the particles start to vibrate. And when they vibrate, they move next group of particles, which also start to vibrate. And then this head of the wave moves another group of particles. And so the sound propagates quite quickly. But this is all mechanical. These are particles interacting with other particles. Now, people wanted to kind of capture this acoustic wave so that they can reproduce it in the first place. And then they also want to process. So if these particle vibrations propagate and they fall onto the microphone diaphragm, the diaphragm also starts moving. And then depending on which type of microphone this is, it will, in general, transform the vibrations of the diaphragm to changes in voltage. So, and this is, voltage, sound as a voltage enabled a whole host of applications in the 20th century. But with the development of computers, things got even more interesting. So now we have voltage. We want to somehow represent it in a computer. So how can we do this? And digital signal processing in general approaches this by sampling. So at regular intervals, it measures the voltage, and the value that it measures is stored in a computer. And to represent 1 second of sound, we typically take, let's say, 48,000 samples from the voltage. And the unit that performs this voltage to samples conversion is called an analog to digital converter, an ADC. And an ADC is present in all of our laptops, for example, in form of a sound card. I, for example, have an external so-called audio interface, and it has an ADC that's separate from my laptop. So we have microphone that converts, acoustic wave into voltage. Then we have an ADC on our sound cards, audio interfaces, that converts voltage into digital samples. And that's where samples enter our computer. So if you're a programmer, you could think of samples as simply arrays of floats. And these floats, floating point numbers, are from -1 to 1. And when we are talking about audio that is being processed continuously, like we are having now, this audio is typically processed in fixed chunks. So if we have the sampling rate of 48,000 samples per second, we could have a buffer size, so an array of length 480 samples, which would correspond to 10 milliseconds. And this 10 milliseconds of audio, it's something that we can manipulate with code, right? These are just numbers in memory. We can process them with an algorithm. Okay, and in our case, these samples are sent over the internet. Maybe they're encoded somehow, and on your end, they are received. They are maybe again processed, and then you need to have them played back over your headphones. So there's another unit in your sound card, which is called a digital to analog converter. And this unit takes the samples and performs special operations to convert these samples into voltage. And this voltage travels again through, I don't know if you have a cable there.
No.
Okay, so I imagine these are Bluetooth headphones, so this makes it even more difficult. But then there is a digital to analog converter in your headphones, and it changes the samples that it receives to voltage, which causes the diaphragm of the speakers, right, that you have in your headphones to move. And the movement of the speaker membrane, again, triggers an acoustic wave that reaches your ear, that is then processed by your hearing apparatus, which I don't want to get into because I'm not sure if I remember every part of it correctly. So that's the whole audio chain. And we as programmers come into this tiny bit where the audio is between the ADC and the DAC. And that's where the processing magic happens.
Okay, I have a couple of follow-up questions. So, for example, I learned at some point that when there is a sun shining, it actually is not shining the same way as the monitors are displaying colors, because it shines all the frequencies. So it's a full white light. Is it? And in my head, if I'm speaking, there should be more than one wave going, right? There should be, similarly to sun, more waves going from my mouth. And then at some point, does it mean that microphone by definition sort of cannot capture all of them and needs to create a wave with the membrane that limits this complexity?
Okay, that's a very good question. Let me think how to answer this. So, since sound is a mechanical wave, regardless of how many frequencies there are in the acoustic wave, they are all superimposed, we could say. So we always see the resulting wave as a sum of these particular frequencies, and we don't differentiate that we're sending 100 hertz sine and 2 hertz sine as two separate waves. They're always superimposed, and we treat them as one wave. We generally assume that human hearing spans the range from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. So this is equivalent, in your example, of the light frequencies that we can see. There's also a range of acoustic waves frequencies that we can hear. And then there's the microphone, which is only capable of capturing a specific frequency range. And that depends on the microphone. And if you buy a microphone, you always can access the specification sheet, which should show basically a curve that depicts how well a microphone captures a given frequency. The same goes for loudspeakers. For loudspeakers, you get a plot of how well a particular speaker plays back all the audible frequencies. And ideally, in both these cases, this covers the whole audible range and is completely flat, right? So that each frequency gets picked up in the same way. In reality, it's not so much. But that's a huge topic that I don't feel an expert in, to be honest.
Okay. So and when you say that microphone doesn't pick up some frequencies well, it means that it drops some of them, or like doesn't represent the proper values?
They are quieter or louder, but in general they are quieter.
Okay, got it. Nice. Then if we talk about synthesizers for a second, then you mentioned that when at some point there's a digital signal and it needs to be converted into the analog thing, is this the synthesizer job in general?
In general, synthesizers cut our processing chain in half. So you don't have the microphone part and the analog to digital conversion. You just generate sound in the computer, and then you send it to the DAC, to the digital to analog converter, to play it back via speakers.
Okay. And then synthesizers can have various samples, meaning you can create various sounds, I'm assuming.
Yes, and that's a very interesting topic in the sense that if you look at samples, it's exactly as if you looked at an array in memory. Like, what would you think if you saw 48,000 numbers from -1 to 1 in an array? For a human, it's unreadable. I mean, it doesn't convey any physical meaning. If we look at sheet music, for example, right? This is very intuitive representation for musicians of music. But a sample is very unintuitive. So digital sound synthesis focuses mostly on giving the creator, the musician, the sound engineer, the tools to convey their intentions and change them into sounds. And there were a number of methods developed that allow this. In non-chronological order, we could think of synthesis of sounds as pursuing or following the way we hear. So we discussed a little bit like the thing with the white light. in sound we have white noise, so signal that contains all frequencies with the same energy. And this is often what you hear in old TVs, right? If they cannot capture the signal properly on the screen, you would get white and black dots, and you could also hear a characteristic noise coming out. So, and it still happens if you listen to FM radios, right? And you cannot hit the right frequency. So we hear, we could say that our ear processes sound using frequencies. This is an approximation, but we could say that we hear sound as consisting of a sum of sinusoids. So for us, a single frequency is a sine tone. Maybe you have somewhere heard this 440 hertz test sine or 1 kilohertz sine. So we could think of all sounds as consisting just of a sum of sinusoids. Again, this is super simplified. But sound synthesis researchers said, okay, if that's the case, we could analyze how our instruments sounds, what they consist of, which frequencies they have, in which relations. And then we can simply generate these signs on a computer and add them up. So, for example, this gets maybe a little bit into musical instruments, but if you pluck a string and it is at the frequency of 100 or let's say 220 hertz, then such a sound would probably contain 440 hertz, then 660 hertz, 880 hertz, and all multiplicities, all multiples of 220 hertz. So why not generate a 220 hertz sine on a computer, and then 440 hertz sine and 660 hertz sine, and add them up? We would get a string, right? The problem is that it's, again, not so simple. Each of these frequencies have a specific loudness, so volume or gain, but it also has an envelope. So how the volume of this particular frequency changes over time. So let's say high frequencies decay very fast, and when we hit a guitar string, we can hear a bright sound, but then the bright side of it diminishes quickly. But the low frequency part of hitting the string, we can hear for a longer time. And this gets very complicated. And when researchers started, modeling sounds this way for sound synthesis, they discovered they have an incredible number of degrees of freedom. And it's very difficult to control. And to this day, additive synthesis is not very popular because of this. In the early days, additive synthesis failed for another reason, like generating 100 signs for a single key press was very computationally expensive, even with approximations. But nowadays, it's not so much a problem, but the problem is to give the musician proper controls so that they can, and intuitive controls, to create sounds using adding particular frequencies. Does it make sense?
Yeah. But then what worked for the synthesizers? Like how do they work now? Because if you say like additive, like just adding the sine waves manually don't really works?
It's difficult. I mean, it's doable, and I've seen signs that do it, but it's simply very difficult. But that's why researchers didn't stop there. They experimented with other synthesis methods. So they said, okay, what if instead of summing the sinusoids, we will generate a signal that's rich in different frequencies, in harmonic frequencies, so a signal that sounds musical, and then let's apply filtering to it, and the filter will cause changes in the amplitudes of particular sines, and we'll be able to shape the sound, the timbre of the sound with just a filter, but not so much with pure sinusoids. And that was inspired by analog synthesis. So most of the analog synthesis, without using the digital medium, was taking, a harmonically rich sound, like a square wave or a triangle wave or a sawtooth wave, and then filtering it with appropriate filter. And that's, where, for example, the Moog synthesizer, which is quite famous, was known thanks to its characteristic filter. So the scientists, the researchers, took this concept to digital, and it works really well, especially nowadays when we have filters that kind of mimic the analog filters, so mimic the sound of analog filters, and we can generate these square waves, sawtooth waves, which are not perfect, but they are similar to the analog equivalents. We can create very easily, nicely sounding timbres. But before we got there, it was not so easy to write this all in code. And above all, at that time where people were experimenting with subtractive synthesis, analog synthesizers were still available, and they did a better job of synthesizing sounds in this way than digital synthesizers. Nowadays, it's people will go with the digital one for their stability, unless they like vintage gear, but it's a whole another topic. But actually, the first methods of sound synthesis that were successful commercially, that were not enclosed in just research labs, was based on frequency modulation. So I don't know how much your audience is versed in amplitude modulation and frequency modulation, but the similar technology is used for radios, just not in the same frequency range. And a similar technology approach is also used, in Wi-Fi and cellular communications, but with electromagnetic waves, not with acoustic waves. But the base principle of frequency modulation was that we have, let's say, a sine, and its phase is modulated, in frequency modulation is theoretical frequency, but to be precise, it was supposed to be called phase modulation. So in phase modulation, we have a sine and we modulate its phase. And in this way, when we do it slowly, we get a vibrato that is a sound effect. If you play a violin and you move your hand a little bit while playing a note, the note's pitch moves up and down. But if you start to move the hand faster and faster to the point where you cross the audible frequency range, so you move it so fast that it goes up and down 20 times per second at least, or 100 times, then the timbre of the sound starts to change. And we get these additional frequencies that appear in the signal's spectrum. And to make it usable, you need to have quite a few tweaks there. But this principle was used in Yamaha DX7 in 1983, which was the first commercially successful digital synthesizer. And this method is not so much used, I think, anymore for modern synthesizers, apart, of course, from those that want to specifically focus on this. But this was like a big breakthrough because phase modulation is quite cheap, computationally speaking, but it allowed for a rich variety of timbres. Okay, not to maybe expand too much on this, but there's very important, I think, also for the gaming industry, synthesis technique that got more popular with decreasing prices of memory. So in initial computers, memory was quite expensive. Nowadays, not so much. So our hard drives are very big. Our RAM are also quite big, and thanks to this fact, two methods emerged that are still very popular in both in sound synthesizers and in games, namely wavetable synthesis and we could say derivative sample-based synthesis. So in wavetable synthesis, we use wavetables to approximate certain wave shapes. So again, imagine a sine wave or a triangle wave or a sawtooth wave. And if we represent one period of such a wave in a wavetable, in an array in memory, we can read it faster or slower. And thanks to this, we can achieve various frequencies. So if we store one period of a sine waveform in an array, and we scan this array one time per second, we get a signal of 1 hertz. If we scan it 100 times per second and output it as samples, we get the frequency of 100 hertz.
Nice.
This is so much more difficult without any slides, but I'm using my hand waving here. And as an extension of this method, we could say we have samples, right? So let's say we have infinite memory. Why not record a piano where we hit every note and we record every note separately, and then whichever note the user presses on their virtual keyboard, let's play back a sample. And this is again trade-off between memory and accuracy. Maybe we want to have a few different samples even for a single note, but maybe we don't want to sample every note, but just every third note. This opens a huge number of possibilities. But sampling is great in the sense that it's very faithful, right? It's the thing. But sampling for some instruments, like bowed instruments, is quite difficult. Yet, people do this, and these samplers are very, very popular. And you have a lot of virtual instruments that use this. And this is very popular, for example, for creating drum tracks. If I want to program my own drums, I have a plugin that has a few versions of the snare recorded, of the toms, of the cymbals, and with these building blocks, I can easily create a realistically sounding percussion. So that's something that still holds to this day. And maybe one last mention here is the granular synthesis. And this is, I'm not sure how much it entered the commercial world, but granular synthesis is something from the very start that was not supposed to be mimic the interaction with a physical instrument, but it was meant to be able to enable the musician to create musical textures for ambient sounds, something very esoteric, but also something that is not so easy to control. And there are so many techniques within that field that it's very difficult to describe in a single word. But in general, if you want to have something that sounds complex, maybe not very musical, but yet interesting, then granular synthesis is something that you would like to look into.
Okay. Now, I have this weird feeling that on the one hand, if at the end I am given an array of floats, right? It's many floats, because if it's 48,000 a second, it means a lot of values, okay? But in the end, if I can represent anything, any sound with these floats, it's sort of almost it should be simple, and then on the other hand, I know that this world is super complex. So I wonder where the complexity comes from. I understand that in these floats, there are actually a lot of frequencies mushed together, they have different envelopes, they change differently, but what is maybe first, what is possible now with the audio in general? For example, if I'm making a game, can I have like 100% of like both music and sounds easily synthesized? Or is it like, The Witcher 3 game came out and it had there's still like, I think there's a couple of days ago there was another one, The Witcher in concert, where like the whole orchestra is playing. So people are in love with music of The Witcher, and yet like you can have it pretty much in a digital form, made in digital form. So I am wondering like to what extent we can use these tools to create audio in a digital format without like human in the loop, and to what extent like these things are not, where they fall short, and what where we would like to have humans in the loop when instruments and people singing, for example.
Okay, that's a great question, but it's a difficult one. Maybe let me answer first. Why is it so complex? In the sense, you are right. I mean, we have however many flows we want in memory, and we can do whatever we want with them. So why is it so difficult? And the scientific answer is that it's because the space of sounds is sparse. So I have a good counterexample to this. Let's look at images, and let's look in particular at images that are, let's say, 64 by 64 pixels. I am sure that many of your listeners seen, let's say, icons on a computer, and there are hundreds of different icons. Hundreds maybe too few, like hundreds of thousands of different icons. Yet imagine having these 64 by 64 pixels image, and now for each pixel generate a random value representing how white this pixel is. So value of 0, is completely black, and the value of 1 is completely white. And every value in between is some shade of gray. It turns out that if we randomly generate these lightness values for each pixel, it's very unlikely that we will get some sensible image out of this. We can generate millions of such images, which are totally unique, yet to a human observer, they're completely rubbish. They're just like this white noise that we get on the TV. And that's because for humans, only certain configurations of pixel lightness values in an image make sense. And the beauty of this is not related to audio, but the beauty of this is that we can leverage this sparsity of the image space to speed up MRI scans. This technique is called compressed sensing, and it's becoming popular. It has become popular only recently in research, and it's making its way to MRI scanners around the world. But if you have a machine that needs to scan your body for many three-dimensional pixels, and if you imagine that you now just have to take a few measurements and have an algorithm that inspects the compressed space and says, okay, in this whole space of possible MRI scans, there's only one that this partial image that I have represents, then it's really amazing that we can leverage this sparsity in algorithms. So back to audio, if we have 1 second of samples, there are a lot less sensible configurations of these 48,000 samples than there are all possible configurations of the 48,000 samples. And that's why neural networks are so interesting, because encoder networks allow transforming samples to a latent space, which is an abstract capturing of the sound. But this abstract capturing uses fewer parameters and is therefore easier to control. So there are some controls that are maybe intuitive or maybe make sense, but these aren't officially labeled. We can use neural networks to detect them in a way. Does this answer your question somewhat?
For the complexity, yes. I
Okay.
didn't. Okay, like it's quite understandable that if you randomize the samples, you don't get the perfect orchestra, performing some sort of song and music. But the complexity thing for the... Okay, now can we explore a little bit the complexity part? Right? Because at the end, we want to have an array of samples that will represent something. So the question is, what are the best tools that I can use to create those sounds, right? So from the synthesizer point of view, if I have samples for each instrument, and then I'm not sure whether you can have a sample for like a choir, like for like vocals, then can I make anything? Like, can I make like pretty much anything once I have this, if I give this direction, right? Like, I'm not randomizing this. Is it possible that I create anything now with the synthesizers and how there are today? Or is it more like I can use them to create some sounds, but not all of them, and there are some sort of properties that tell you what can be done or not?
I think you're very right in that sense that first of all, I think you need to be aware of what you want to do and why you want to do this, and then you can look for the best tool for the job. My impression is, and this is a personal thing, that in general samples beat simulation nowadays because it's just so easy to store them. So it's, if you want to record the sound of a rock falling on another rock, modeling this physically will be quite difficult, whereas recording such a sound is super simple. The complexity then in the implementation of playback may come, from reading the file from the disk in the specific time, in the right time, or managing the samples in memory. But this, I believe, is a solved engineering problem. But from the sound design perspective, unfortunately, for all the sound synthesis researchers, samples beat simulation. But it's not always there are certain sounds that you want to generate, and this would need to be very specific. So you need to know what kind of sound you want to make, and then you need to pick the right tool. But we're also free to combine them. As an example, let me point to a research paper that I've seen recently. In the paper, they explored how can we take the samples of hitting something. So they analyzed various fabrics that hit each other. I don't know, like rock against rock, but maybe rock against concrete, maybe wood against rock, etc., etc. These are all different sounds, and if you want to create a realistic game, first of all, you probably need to have samples for all kinds of these interactions, but then you also want to add a tweak so that whenever time I hit some like two rocks hit each other, you don't hear this exactly the same sound, because that would immediately bring the player out of the immersion. So the paper investigated how we can take a single sample and say rock hitting a rock, and then run it through, let's say, a neural network to create a variation of the sample in real time. So you see here we have a sample, which is something that we recorded, but we don't play it back raw. We play it back, but we run it through a neural network before to get a variation of the sound, so that it is interesting to the listener, to the player. Then the maybe not so sound synthesis part, but the audio effect part is also very important. If you have a rock that hits a rock in a small room, that's a completely different sound than if a rock falls from the top of a very large cave and hits the bottom of the cave, and then you get this huge echo and reverberation. And applying, like, it's not feasible to record samples of every possible setup. So the sound designer will want to apply some kind of audio effect to the sample to make it sound more realistic in a given setting. And frankly, the state of audio effects currently is amazing. I mean, they are quite cheap to run, and what you get is incredibly sculptable, right? You have complete control over the effect that you're getting. And this trend kind of continues. Like I try to come up with a few examples of what we can simulate and what we cannot. When it comes to simulation of physical instruments, for example, you can simulate quite well a string, like a single guitar string. This is very difficult from the physical point of view, and the simulation in general is very costly. So it's not something that you could run in real time. It's very difficult to have like a virtual scene in a game where someone comes in and starts playing a guitar, and the guitar is generated from a physical model. I mean, at least to my knowledge, because these models are very complicated. And this is just a single string, right? If you look at a piano, you have most of the keys use 3 strings. And when these strings vibrate, they interact with each other. They are hit by a hammer. The hammer's interaction with the string is not a single point. It needs to be modeled as well. Then the strings interact with the plate. They interact with the frame of the instrument, with the body of the instrument. And these interactions, when we hear them, we are not even aware of how complex they are to model in physics. So, purely physical approaches are probably not feasible in these situations. We may have some approximations. For example, for a string, there is a Karplus-Strong algorithm, which has nothing to do with physics. But if you listen to it, it really sounds like a string. Like it's a very simple algorithm, but it really works. So there are these non-physical methods. It's really difficult to say. It always depends on what you want to do. Now, if like a few years ago, I would also say that like vocal synthesis, generating a singing voice, is something that's like you would always need a human singer. But I saw products like Vocaloid by Yamaha, like Synthesizer V Studio by Dreamtonics. These are applications that can take your lyrics, can take your musical line, and they can generate realistically sounding vocals, which are based on the vocalist that they recorded with their permission to be used in these applications. And the degree of control you have is amazing in these programs. Like in the Synthesizer VStudio, I'm not affiliated with them by any means, but you could draw the curves that would, raise the pitch of at the end of a syllable of a rapping voice. I'm not going to attempt to reproduce this, but this should tell you how much control you have over sounds in these synthesizers. Okay, and the last 2 points that I'd like to mention here is maybe that if you want to generate some ambient music, these are then quite difficult to generate with physical instruments, with physical musical instruments. This is the realm of electronic music. This is something when you would definitely reach out for digital synthesis methods, because they allow you to create timbres that do not exist in the real world. So in a world without transistors. And the last thing is that modeling rooms, modeling the acoustics of rooms is still an unsolved problem, in the sense that what works best in games are approximate methods, just like based on ray tracing or beam tracing. But physical modeling of room spaces is a really difficult problem. I mean, if you take a simple room, it's called a shoebox room, which it's the simplest shape of a room you can imagine, you can get pretty far with not so expensive simulation methods to simulate the acoustics in that room. But as soon as you add any furniture inside, as soon as this furniture has certain materials, simulating this to be physically correct it's not a thing for real-time computations, and frankly I doubt if it will ever be, to be honest, because it's much more likely that we'll use some intermediate, some approximate method to generate this. So I think the answer is where this complexity comes from is that physical world is complex, and to model it mathematically is one thing. This is already super complex, but to then run simulations that can allow us to calculate how this environment sounds is yet another layer of complexity. So I'm not sure if we'll ever get physical spaces that are arbitrary physical spaces that are modeled 100% or 99% accurately using precise physical methods. I think we'll always stay in this realm of approximate methods.
Okay. Now, turning a little bit into the programming section, can you tell me how audio programming looks like? Because I can imagine, programming, let's say, UI applications and various other things. But when we talk about audio programming, what do we talk about? Like, what would be the usual work for client applications? Like, what would be the space? Like, what would you do as an audio programmer?
That's a great question. And I'm not sure if I can list all possible applications, but there are definitely, various industries that, use this. So, of course, what's simplest for me is creating audio plugins. If you are a music producer, a musician, a sound engineer, and you work in a studio, which can be a home studio, you are likely to use digital audio workstations. These are programs that allow you to record sound or MIDI notes and then generate sounds based on those MIDI notes and apply effects and mix these tracks together. And what the digital audio workstations are powerful software packages on their own, but they are so powerful also thanks to the fact that they can run external plugins provided by developers other than the authors of the digital audio workstation. And these plugins can be something like exactly like a synthesizer, or they can be effects. And these are typical effects that a music producer uses, like an equalizer and EQ to change the spectral content of sound, or change the volume of frequency ranges, we could say. There's the compression plugins that change the dynamics of signal to make it, in simplified terms, louder or quieter, we could say. And there are plugins to remove noise. I mean, for podcasting, this is a huge area, right? I'm not a professional speaker, so my mouth produces clicks or tongue smacks. And there are a lot of breaths when I speak, and all this can be removed via plugins. And we have mastering plugins that process sound for specific platforms like Spotify or YouTube. We have reverb plugins, so creative effects plugins that apply reverberation to the sound, to make them sound like they were played out in a specific acoustic environment. And we have distortion effects that, for example, that's what you hear with the electric guitars. We have autotune, right? Which is now used almost all the time in popular music, which kind of corrects the trajectory, the pitch trajectory of your voice. And frankly, I cannot even list half of possible plugins that are out there. If you are an audio developer, it's very likely that you'll be working either on a digital audio workstation or on an audio plugin or something related. And this is one definitely area where I did projects and where my students also asked me to help them develop their plugins. So this is one area where you can work. Another is audio apps, I would say. So these are self-contained applications that can use audio. For example, I mentioned I was working on a music app, which was called Music Maker Jam, and it was an application where you had a few tracks. You could put pre-recorded loops or samples on those tracks. So like a let's say drum pattern, right? Or some guitar section, and then you could combine these, change their volume, again apply effects. And this again draws a little bit on this idea of a digital audio workstation, but not necessarily. You can have music apps, you can have like virtual instruments, right? So applications that like Jordan Rudess of Dream Theater, you run on your iPad and then you can play live. And then you can move even further from this, for example, to game audio, right? What it would be a game if it didn't have audio inside. And that's, again, similar to audio plugins in some regards, but different in others, depending also on the type of game this is. Then we have, let's say, music players, right? But then we have a whole host of applications related to streaming through the web, and everything that's related to streaming audio over network. This is very difficult, very different from audio plugins. And this, again, another host of tools that enters the stage. And then I think the most lucrative part of dealing with sound digitally is speech. So automatic speech recognition, ASR, and text-to-speech generators, TTFs. These are, huge businesses and which have a lot of capital invested in them. Also, in the industry side, but also in the research side. So this is, and of course you have simulation software. So you have software that you specify a geometry of a room and it performs acoustic analysis. For example, if it's a concert hall, what will its properties be, which can then inform the architect what should be changed, what can be problematic, etc. So I think I covered at least most of them. I hope I didn't left out anything important.
Nice. That's way more and broader than I thought initially. And I didn't realize, now when you say this, it kind of makes more sense, but I didn't realize that automatic speech recognition is a big market. But now when I think about like all the automation in the areas of like support and like now it kind of makes sense.
Hearing aids, I mean, it's also a huge market. I mean, at FAU where I studied, they collaborated with Siemens and Siemens, but there are also a few other companies in that area. They do a lot of research to be able to provide better hearing aids, because in modern hearing aids, you have multiple microphone arrays, and you need to process sound from them simultaneously, and all this to enhance human experience. And if you think about it, the older we get, on average, the more likely we'll need good hearing device in the future.
So it's a growing market with
Yes.
this. Tell me then a little bit about the programming language, which is C++. This is, as far as I understand, the dominant language of audio processing. I'm assuming that this is like the highest level language that is also low level enough to handle some situations performantly, I think. Is this would be a good guess? Why is it the sort of prevalent programming language of the audio processing world?
Yeah, this is a very good question. I think a lot of people, ask themselves, what's next, right? Like, will there be something post C++, or are we stuck with this forever? And the answer is, we'll probably stuck with C++ for a while at least. I'm not a gaming expert, but when you use Unreal Engine, can you use some other language than C++?
Not really. Like, you can have very high level blueprints, which is like a scripting layer, but underneath there's whole swath of C++ that is not going away. Exactly.
So in audio, it's kind of similar. So if you look at the language per se, C++ gives you this notion of zero cost abstraction and interoperability with the C language. So historically, a lot of audio software was written in C. I think all of the audio codecs, so the programs that encode and decode audio to file formats like MP3, they're written in C because the C programming language is super portable, right? There are a lot of devices that can use C. So C++ is interoperable with C, but C++ also gives you nice abstractions, additional mechanisms, etc. And nowadays, when we look, I think the biggest competitor to C++ worldwide is Rust, I think, which is a widely beloved language. But there are other languages that people look for when it comes to real-time programming, like Nim, Zig, that's what I heard. Even Jai, which what I hear is very exciting in the game industry. So that's one thing, like the historical reasons. And when we have this discussion, it's very important to underline that we talk about C++ in audio only in the context of real-time audio. If you just want to process a bunch of audio files on your computer to a different set of audio files, I mean, use Python. Just use Python or whatever you feel comfortable with, but probably Python is your best choice. But if you need to play back audio in real time, you need to use C++. And that comes mostly from the fact So like it's interoperable with C, as I said, but operating system vendors often provide APIs to interact with the audio device in C or C++. For example, on Android, if you want to interact with sounds in a real-time fashion, your best bet is the Oboe library, which is written in C++. It comes from Google, right? But the main reason why C++ is here to stay in audio is the Juice C++ framework. So Juice C++ framework is an application development framework which is designed to create cross-platform applications and also with cross-platform UIs, but also gives you a host of audio-related facilities. I think this is best explained when we look at the history of this framework. So this framework was developed by Jules Storer to extract out common code from a digital audio workstation he was working on and kind of the abstraction layer of audio plugins. And to understand why we need an abstraction layer of audio plugins, it's again important to look for historical reasons. When we have different digital audio workstations, and these are programs like Ableton Live, like Bitwig Studio, Reaper, like Pro Tools from Avid, and many, many more, but not incredibly many. There are, I think, a handful of DAWs that are popular. Also, Cubase from Steinberg, FL Studio, PreSonus Studio One, and Logic Pro, of course, from Apple. Like, these are the programs that are most widely used. And all of them support plugins in specific formats. So let's say I want to create a plugin for, what would be a good example? For Bitwig, let's say. There I can use the most recent clap format. But the clap format plugin won't work in Logic Pro, because Logic Pro only uses audio units, which is a format provided by Apple. Additionally, audio units can also be used on iOS. And then there's also the VST3 format from Steinberg, which is very popular, but again, it's not supported in Logic Pro. So imagine that you want to create a plugin and you want it to be commercially successful. So you need to support as many DAWs as possible. Now, all these plugin formats are similar but different, of course. So you need to have some abstraction layer if you don't want to go crazy. I mean, you can create separate version of your plugin for every plugin format, but this industry is not profitable enough probably for you to make it work long term, especially that these plugin formats change, right? So here comes the Juice C++ framework. There are a few frameworks like this available. I think the largest competitor is iPlug 2 in the C++ side. But such a plugin framework allows you to write a single piece of code that then automatically is compiled to all the plugin formats that you want to support. So that's the main benefit of Juice. But the other main benefit is that you can write your user interface code in a cross-platform manner. So you don't have to touch any of the operating system stuff. And much like Qt, you get this, you write this abstracted code that then looks similar on, Windows, macOS, Linux, Android, and iOS. And, Juice also runs on embedded platforms. And when I say this, I want to say this up front, that although I'm not, this is not a paid commercial, I do work with the Juice C++ framework team. So I'm completely biased on this. But if you look at the data, I mean, I would bet that over 90% of the audio plugin industry uses Juice to create their plugins, because you have this cross-platform UI, you have all these audio plugin features, but you also get a ton of audio and UI related utilities, right? C++ standard library is getting larger and larger, but there are just some things that it doesn't do and it probably won't ever do. So Juice really simplifies writing audio code, and it's probably the main reason why we're still stuck in this realm of C++. To be honest, I like C++, but I have nothing against Rust. I'm still learning Rust, and I appreciate all the good defaults there. But as a teacher, I see how C++ is complicated for beginners. There are really so many things that you can do wrong very easily, and the compiler won't even mention this in the warnings. So, thanks to this, I have a job as a teacher, but at the same time, I'm curious what the future will bring. At the same time, I believe the Juice, again, simplifies C++ a lot. Juice C++ framework, is written in pure C++. There's nothing, it's not a different syntax or anything, but it's just very object-oriented. So if you write your program in Juice, it feels a little bit like you were writing Java, which, some may like it, some may hate it, but no one will disagree that writing Java code is not so complicated as writing C++ code.
All right.
So yeah, that's why C++ is here to stay.
Okay. And the digital audio workstations, they are all written in C++? Do you know?
Most of them are closed source, but judging from all the discussions that I had, they are written in C++. I would not be surprised if some parts of Logic Pro were written in Objective-C, or maybe even Swift, because it's Mac only.
Okay.
But it's all closed source. So I don't know, but I would bet that most of it is C++. And when you see talks from DAW developers, they mostly reference C++ examples.
Okay. How odd. Okay. Can you tell me then something about WolfSound?
Oh yeah, that's my favorite topic. Yeah, so as I mentioned at the beginning, WolfSound was initially meant to be a platform where I can create these tutorial videos and articles on my blog at thewolfsound.com that explain the audio stuff to others. The inspiration for this YouTube channel and blog, and this was specifically meant to be a YouTube channel from the get-go. I just found the blog form a great supplement to the YouTube channel, which many people find useful, is that, I started my studies in 2015. And to me, that was the year where, YouTube really took off when it comes to education. There's one guy in particular that I want to mention here. His name, or his YouTube channel name, is called Derek Banas. He has now, I think, a couple million subscribers on YouTube or something. And he had programming tutorials, which was back in the day where programming tutorials were not so ubiquitous. You didn't have all these fancy programming learning platforms. And he just did, all these videos, like whole playlist on Learn Java, whole playlist on Learn C#, Learn Python, Learn design patterns. And I found this really amazing. These videos were short, to the point, very clear. He showed you with examples what he was working on. He also always had a book recommendation under the video. And this is so amazing. I love it. I mean, imagine that you have this feeling that you can learn anything, right? I really like to learn, but now with YouTube, I was able to easily learn anything. I wasn't just forced to learn from my teachers. I could pick my teachers. I could literally decide who I want me to teach. And I was just also amazed, what are the limits of what I can learn, right? I don't want to list all the channels that I then browsed, but it was really amazing how much value I got from YouTube. And I said, like, this is amazing. Maybe that's something I could do, or rather, I thought it's something I want to do. And it will also make me better at what I do, because as the saying goes, if you teach something, you learn it twice. And a lot of teachers I know told me that they finally understood some topic when they needed to teach it, right? So that was the idea. It was already there in 2016, I think. But then I had some other projects going on apart from my studies. And I learned that it's not good to have a few big projects in parallel. So I really waited with this until 2019. And then I did this I started WolfSound. I started publishing some videos on the basics of signal processing and some Python code. But then I had a break because I didn't want to have a few big projects in parallel. And one of the big projects I had at that time was writing, recording, creating my first music album, The Fire Will Rise. And I put WolfSound on hold and returned to it in 2021. And that's when I really started to publish every week, either an article or a video. And I threw at this a bunch of different topics, like sound synthesis, creating plugins with Juice, creating audio effects. And my main goal was to be consistent. That was really important to me. And I believed that if I am consistent, something good will happen. I didn't even know what exactly, but I thought maybe this will be a door opener for a job, because having a YouTube channel is something that distinguishes you on the job market. But also, I found it extremely satisfying to see these tiny pieces of work published there. And I really like also the short form, right? These weren't books which take a long time to write. These were really short pieces which forced me to really get focused on them. This was a lot of work, I must admit, and it still is, because there are a lot of parts that you cannot automate. And this is cognitive work. I mean, I don't ramble on like right now, just sitting in front of a camera. Like, this needs to be prepared very diligently, because I really wanted to have this university quality standard, that what I teach has proper references, that I can go back to this and I can see, okay, that was the equation that I'm after, and I am sure that this equation is right. So of course I made mistakes, but this was still good enough to serve me. And when I found out that it served a lot of other people, I started learning about building a business, because having a personal brand was also something that appealed to me. And I was not even sure in which direction to directly have it. But I had this idea of maybe somewhere in the future to create online courses. And maybe this is something that I could eventually supplement my income with. So I also approached this not only from this passion perspective, but also from this business perspective. And also in 2021, I had this idea of having a podcast, much like you have, where I would bring people from the research and the industry, and I could ask them questions that I also wanted to know the answer to. the background for this was that I really wanted to get into the audio developer industry. I really wanted to write code to process audio. So I used my contacts, which I was fortunate to have, to people who were kind enough to dedicate their time to answer my questions. And this was, this was not recorded in any way, but I got so much value out of these conversations. And I can name here, for example, Julian Parker, who at that time, I believe, was working at Native Instruments, and Kurt Werner, who was back then at Isotope. And these were incredibly bright people who dedicated their time just to answer my questions for, no reward whatsoever. And I thought, well, I get so much value out of these conversations. Why not have it as a podcast so that other people can learn this stuff and can get inspired, can learn the stories of these developers? And this really was turned out to be a very good idea. Because to this day, my podcast is not incredibly popular, but whoever listens to it really gets a lot of inspiration from these amazing people who once were just like us, right? Regular software developers or even students who aspired to be software developers. And a side effect of the podcast was that I got to have quite a few connections in the field, and that somehow people who I interviewed, which was I didn't earn any money with the podcast, and it's not profitable for me in any way. But maybe this convinced them that I'm an okay guy who wants to do something good, and then like all of them started treating me in a very friendly manner, which was very kind of them. But this also eventually led to opening doors in the industry. So I feel like I got there kind of through the back door, but at the same time, I trust in my skills, and I'm confident enough that I asked for a job at those companies, and thanks to these connections, I was able to be pinged by Ian Hobson there, who I also want to shout out to, who said, yeah, I have this friend who needs someone to create an audio-related app for them. Would you be up for it? And I was like, yes, that's exactly what I was looking for. Let's do this. And I never looked back. So this platform is really what enabled me to meet a ton of amazing people, and also have the job that I've been dreaming all along. But this doesn't end here, because I'm not just a freelancer. So in 2022, I conducted a survey among my. That's not quite true. Actually, I had people reaching out to me and asking if they can pay me to teach them. Like this wasn't like a crowd of people, but these were enough emails that I started like an official business. This was even before I became a freelancer, and I started teaching people to on DSP, on creating audio plugins, writing audio code, C++, and all that's related. And based on this, and based on also on the surveys that I did, I kind of gathered my thoughts and saw that there are basically three things that you need to learn to become an audio plugin developer. And these were digital signal processing, like the theory. Then this was C++ and let's say the art of programming, the programming basics, how does software work, etc. And the third pillar was basically the Juice C++ framework. So in 2022, I started working on an online course on digital signal processing. And I released it in 2023. It's called DSP Pro, and you can find it at wolfsoundacademy.com/DSP. And that's where I put all that you need to know from the signal processing side to be able to work on audio plugins, on cool audio effects, on sound synthesis, etc. Like the basics, the real basics. And this was a success, in my opinion, and that's where I really started believing that this is something that I could do as a business. Now, this was very difficult for me personally, because I had a full-time job. I was doing blog posts and YouTube videos, and I was working on the course. And to be honest, I still haven't found a way to speed it up significantly, because it does require a lot of thought. Maybe if I brought someone else on, but then it would lose a little bit of its charm, and it's still not clear to me, who this other person could be, because there aren't many people who are confident enough to do teaching basically in this area. That's why also it's difficult in that sense. But another opportunity came up, and in 2020, at the Audio Developer Conference 2023, I got to chat with a guy named Derek Heimlich, that I also want to really shout out to. So Derek worked at Pace and still works there, who owns the Juice C++ framework. And I asked him, hey, I have this podcast. I'm looking for possible sponsors. Do you know anybody? And, maybe I didn't know this at this time, but actually Derek knows everybody in this industry. And it's not an exaggeration. And when you meet him at the Audio Developer Conference, you just know that he knows everybody in this area. So Derek was kind enough, he had seen some of my videos, and he recommended me to the Juice team. And Tom Poole, the director of Juice, who I also deeply admire, was trusted me enough to say, okay, let's do this. Let's sponsor your podcast. And actually then, about this time, we started also discussing, well, maybe we could do some more tutorials about Juice itself. So that's where I become the face and the designer of the creator of Juice's official YouTube channel, which was also a big step up in my career, in the sense of being officially endorsed by Juice in that sense. If you know how Juice big is in the audio industry, then you'll know it's something. And I'm still think that it was incredible, but it didn't stop there. Because at the Audio Developer Conference 2024, I pitched to Tom the idea that we need to cover like another pillar of these three that I mentioned. I had the DSP course, I didn't have a C++ course, and I didn't have a Juice course. So I wanted the people to be able to learn all this stuff without going to a university, which not only is expensive and costs you a lot of time, which most music developers, music producers and sound engineers don't have, but it's not taught widely. I mean, there are only a handful of schools that teach Juice. So I said to Tom that I will do this course. It's just, it would be so much better if we could do this in collaboration. And again, Tom trusted me with this, and the owners of the Pace company got convinced that it is a good idea to invest in this. And in this year, we published the official Juice C++ framework course for making audio plugins, which can be found again at wolfsoundacademy.com/juice. And I'm especially pitching this today because this course is entirely free. So if you go through this course, I don't earn anything extra, but you will be able to create your own audio plugins. And that's why I think Juice's involvement was amazing. The other benefit is that they thoroughly reviewed and curated and influenced the whole content of the course. So it would never be as good as it is if it wasn't for especially Ruben Thomas, who went through all the scripts and added his notes and his wordings, which I think is amazing. So if there's any impact of this episode, it's not that, I'm a cool guy, which would be nice if you thought this way, but the real impact should be that if you want to learn to create audio plugins and audio software even in general, but specifically audio plugins for digital audio workstations, then I encourage you to go through the official Juice online course, because it's a course that's completely free and there are no additional pitches there for your money or whatsoever. And it teaches you the basics of audio plugin development, the basics of digital signal processing, and the basics of Juice. And when you're done with the course, you'll have created your first professional audio plugin. And I'm looking forward to the future of if and how, if possible, we'll do a second edition of this course where we incorporate even more content so that it's really basically the only place you need to go to learn audio plugin development. So that's exactly where WolfSound is at this point, because we published this course exactly a week ago, and this is to the hour. And I'm super excited for what the future may bring.
Nice. Perfect. Yeah, we will put the links to courses and to WolfSound in general in the description so that everybody can find it easily. And for me, I would like to thank you for your time and effort to come here and talk about audio. Yeah, this was awesome.
Thank you, Wookash. Thank you for having me. And apologies for all the scientific mistakes that I made along the way. I was not able to reference any of the specific books here, but I'm sure that among the links we can also provide errata if I said something wrong.
Comments will always bring out the truth, as usually happens.
That's right. So please, if you spotted any errors in what I just said, please shout it out in the comments. I'm also learning all the time, so I'd love to learn some more.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.